Hello, I'm Ollie. This is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pop, horror, that kind of thing. Today, kind of crime, kind of horror. I'm going to talk about 6 stories by Matt Wesolowski. So it's not often I film a review video immediately after finishing the book, but I have just finished this book and it was so good. I wanted to talk about it straight away. So this is a book I've had on my Kindle for ages. It's one of those books that's been lurking, to use Michael Gayborn's phrase, on my Kindle for a very long time. And it was the fact that I got this, Demon, which is the 6th book in the series, in a recent Abominable Book Club book subscription box that reminded me about 6 stories and prompted me to read it, and I'm really glad I did because it was brilliant. So there are, as I say, this is the 6th book in the series. It turns out I've got all 5 of the previous books on my Kindle, which is shows you what a problem I have buying Kindle books. I've had 5 books in the series and I haven't read any of them. But the format is I think what makes them and is really neat and really clever. So the format is that they're effectively a podcast. So obviously more recently than these books, the TV show Only Murders in the Building with Steve Martin and Martin Short, which is fantastically entertaining and very music if you haven't watched it, has taken that kind of idea of people making a podcast investigating a crime. The format of these books is slightly different, and as I say, very clever. It works brilliantly. So the format is that what you get in the book is you get a few sections. So there are 6 chapters or 6 parts to the book. And the reason it's called 6 stories is because you get 6 people's interpretation or recollection of a past horrific or tragic event. So there are 6 parts to the book, and in each one of those parts you do get a bit that's written like in the first person, where one of the characters is, talking about their experiences, or, is experiencing stuff, is narrating. But what you also get, the rest of each of the 6 parts is basically just the transcript of a podcast. Not a real podcast, but just, it is 2 people talking to each other, and that's it, with no prose in between or anything like that. Just the speech of one person interviewing another. And you also get in those sections the podcast host's kind of monologue, his thoughts about what has been said in the interview, and basically that's it. That's the whole book. And it when you think about it, most crime novels, or certainly mystery novels, are just that. They are just a series of people talking or being interviewed about an event, and the reader's understanding of that event building through the different interviews that the police have done. So the fact that Matt Wesolowski has chosen to structure this as a podcast, and basically stripped that mystery novel trope right down to its absolute bare bones, I think is really, really clever, and it works really well. And it's left me very, very keen to read the next book in the series. I'm really interested to see if there's what relationship there is besides the existence of this podcast between the different books in the series, because at the moment I've got no idea if there's ties back in the subsequent books to the first book. Anyway, so what it's about is a teenage boy who's gone missing in, I think it's the 80s, I think it's the mid-80s or mid-90s, like an outward bound centre. I don't know if you call them that in other parts of the world, but basically somewhere in the countryside where children and teenagers go for like a weekend in the country to kind of do country stuff and go on hikes and orienteering and all that sort of stuff, with adult supervision obviously. And at some point in the past, I say in the 80s or 90s, I forget which, this young boy has gone missing, and a year later his body has turned up and been discovered. But no one has ever been charged with the crime. So, the police investigated people at the time, spoke to everybody, but they didn't get enough to make any, to arrest anybody. So what's now happening is, 20 some years later, this podcaster, whose name is Scott King, is interviewing 6 people who were, have got some sort of relationship either to the victim or to what happened at the time. And as I say, you know, the story just builds through those interviews. And as is typical in this kind of thing, there are certain events that everybody has got a slightly different take on. But you as the reader, you know, Scott King as the host of the podcast interprets those things a bit for you, but there's also, you know, a large element left to you as the reader to piece those bits together, and it's a beautiful puzzle. It works very well from that respect. What I would also say about it is there's definitely a horror element to it as well. So first and foremost, it's a mystery, but there are I'm not going to go any more than say horror elements to it, which are very nicely teased out. And it at the end, you know, having finished it, I still can't decide if it was a mystery novel or a horror novel. But it's definitely very creepy at times, very enjoyable. And there are the kind of typical themes you get in books about teenagers, I guess. So there's definitely a lot of discussion of bullying in the book. You know, that plays a very important part. There's you know, kind of neglect of children. There's, you know, the kind of coming of age stuff. So, you know, the teenagers starting to experiment with alcohol and with drugs and things like that. And it feels quite credible. So that, you know, the horror elements aside, the portrayal of these, you know, these young people, and also the fact that you're learning these things, kind of mediated through the characters' recollections. So these are, you know, middle-aged people now talking about what happened to them as teenagers, and that in itself is quite interesting and quite nicely done in the book. Yeah, you know, and as you know, for me as someone who was a teenager around the time the book was set, it was quite, and you know, clearly I'm now middle-aged. It was quite interesting, that kind of looking back, that kind of nostalgia to the teenage years. So yeah, that element of it is very nicely handled as well. It's also got a fantastic twist just towards the end, which I did not see coming at all. It's brilliantly done, and completely turns the rest of the book on its head. It's very, very clever. Great twist. And that's probably all I want to say about it, other than the fact I think you should read it. It's a nicely done mystery. It's creepy. It's got you know, some good horror elements to it, and it's quite short too. It's like 200 pages or something like that. So I read it in a day. It's, you know, it's extremely readable. It's really compelling. The mystery element of it really keeps you going, and the fact you've got these different voices works well as well to keep things fresh, because, you know, each of the 6 characters has a different voice and a different way of telling the story. So even though you're going over the same events again and again, really, it hangs together very nicely. Guess who forgot to film an outro for the video? This guy. I hope you enjoyed it anyway. If you read any of the 6 Stories books, do let me know. If you haven't, I really do recommend them. But yeah, I hope you're safe and well, and I will speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.